All right, today we're going to continue talking about federalism, and we're going to talk about government services and comparing the U.S. and Florida Constitution. Okay, so as just a review, federalism is how we have different levels of government, federal, state, and local, and how they share power. If you remember, delegated or enumerated or expressed powers are powers of the federal government. Reserved powers are given to the states by the 10th Amendment, and then concurrent powers are shared powers that federal and state governments can both share and do. In a federal system of government, there are 3 different levels, and each level are responsible for different government services. Some of those only the federal, state, or local do. Some of those are shared by federal, state, or local, which would be concurrent powers. I don't know if you can see this chart, but if you look at this, this is a pretty good summary of what is a federal power, a state power, a local power, and which ones they share. So a good example of something that's a federal, state, and local power are roads or police. You have federal roads, state roads, local roads. You have federal police, state police, local police. So it's a good example of something that's shared between them. All right, so what are some things the federal government is responsible for? Providing for military, national security, maintaining the national highways, like interstate highways that go between multiple states, the mail service, coining money, assisting states with natural disasters like FEMA, protecting the environment, the EPA, keeping flights safe, the FAA keeps flights safe, providing Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, and health care for older people and those in need. So those are some things that the federal government provides. The big ones being military, coining money, post office, health care, those types of things. All right, so what are some things that state governments provide? Making laws for residents of Florida. That'd be a concurrent power because federal government and local governments can make laws too, but making laws for all people of Florida, the Department of Education, maintaining state roads, licenses, elections is a good one, maintaining state parks. Some of these are concurrent powers that you'll actually see at all 3 levels, like a state park or state roads or law enforcement. You'll see that at federal, state, and local. But if it's a state park or a state road, then it's a state government service. But the big ones being here, making laws for residents, licenses, elections, creating Department of Education. We kind of talked about that under reserve powers earlier. Okay, so most of the government services that you use on a day-to-day basis are provided by the local government. Building public schools, this school, local schools in the area were built by local governments. Local law enforcement, the ones you're used to seeing, the Flagler County Sheriff, things like that. And then all of your like utilities, water, sewer, garbage, electricity, your internet, those things are all provided by local government. And then you have your local parks, local libraries, and things like that. So these are some of the local services. So on your test, if I put a driver's license, that's a state service. If I put $1, that's a federal service. If I put like the Flagler County Library, that's a local service. So just some examples there. Local governments also maintain local roads, provide public housing, maintain golf courses, community centers like the one right by FPC there. And they also create ordinance, which is what a local law is called an ordinance. Whereas like a law passed by the legislature, like Florida legislature is called a statute. Local laws are called ordinances. And that's a vocab word you want to know. Okay, so this PowerPoint actually has 2 topics on it. We're going to talk about them on Wednesday and Thursday. This one's very important for your test, and that is comparing the United States Constitution and the Florida Constitution. We have a constitution for the whole country, but every state also has their own state constitution. And a lot of things are very similar, but a lot of things are important to notice that they are different. All right, so let's look at some of the ways they're similar. They are organized in the same way. They have a preamble, articles that explain government, and then amendments that have been added rights. They both begin with we the people, this idea of consent to the government, social contract, that we give power to government. They both begin with those 3 words. They are both living documents, which means they're able to be amended and changed. They both have a list of protected rights. The United States Constitution has a Bill of Rights. The Florida has the Declaration of Rights, but many of the rights that are protected are the same. Freedom of speech, the right to bear arms, trial by jury. A lot of those rights we talked about with the U.S. Constitution are also in the Florida Constitution. And then they're also organized the same. 3 branches of government: executive, legislative, judicial, a bicameral legislature with 2 parts, checks and balances, separation of powers. The Constitution organizes both the federal and Florida Constitution organized in the same way. So a lot of similarities there. Okay, let's look at differences. The U.S. Constitution is much shorter. So the U.S. Constitution is 1 long page with 7 articles that explain government. The Florida Constitution is 12 articles over 80 pages. The U.S. Constitution has 4,000 words, Florida Constitution 50,000 words. So it's much larger. The U.S. Constitution's only ever had 1 constitution. We ratified it in 1787. Florida has had 6 constitutions, a lot of them happening post-Civil War during Reconstruction, but 6 constitutions. Now, this is an important one. The Florida Constitution, or the U.S. Constitution, has only been amended 27 times. It is much harder to amend the U.S. Constitution than the Florida Constitution, which has been amended almost 150 times. So almost 5-6 times as more amendments for the Florida Constitution. That's because there's more ways to amend the Constitution. And it's a little bit easier to amend the Florida Constitution. All right, another big difference we talked about earlier in the week is the Supremacy Clause, which says the U.S. Constitution is superior, is supreme, meaning that if the Florida Constitution contradicts the U.S. Constitution, they say opposite things, the U.S. Constitution wins. Obviously, the Florida Constitution doesn't have a Supremacy Clause because it can't. The U.S. Constitution is supreme. So those are some key differences. Longer for the Florida Constitution, more amendments, and obviously no Supremacy Clause. So the last thing, a couple more differences. The U.S. Constitution is a little bit more vague, where the Florida Constitution is more specific. For example, the U.S. Constitution only lists your basic fundamental rights, whereas the Florida Constitution is a little more specific, like you have the right to privacy, the right to work, tax rights, things like that. And then this is an important difference. The U.S. cabinet is chosen by the president, by the executive branch. Remember, chosen by the president, confirmed by the Senate. The Florida cabinet is actually elected by voters. So Ron DeSantis doesn't get to choose his Secretary of Agriculture. It's actually a Democrat. He wouldn't have chosen a Democrat, but it's a Democrat that won election. And so the Florida cabinet is actually elected by the voters, not chosen by the governor. Okay, so this is another main difference here, is how are amendments added? They both can have amendments added, but the way that they're added is very different. So if you remember, there are 2 steps: propose and ratify. You need to know what that means. Suggest and approve, right? That's what ratify means, is to approve. The U.S. Constitution can be proposed 2 ways, but really just 1 way: 2/3 of a vote in both houses of Congress, or 2/3 of states, but that one's never been used. So really it's 2/3 of Congress votes for a constitutional amendment. Florida, very different here, can be proposed a constitutional amendment 5 different ways. Either by a ballot initiative by 8% of the population. So if 8% of the Florida population signs a ballot, basically a petition, it gets added. I've signed petitions to add amendments to the Constitution. So it takes a certain amount of votes. So a lot of amendments get added to the ballot by petitions. The state legislature can propose it by 3/5 vote. We can have a constitutional convention in Florida. There's a tax commission that can propose amendments. And then there's a constitutional commission every 20 years that adds a whole bunch of amendments. So there's 5 different ways, whereas the U.S. Constitution really only add amendments 1 way, 2/3 vote, both houses of Congress. We can propose an amendment in Florida 5 ways. And then the way they're ratified is very different. The U.S. Constitution, there's 2 ways: either the state legislature or state conventions. 3/4 of them have to ratify. However, there's only 1 way to ratify a Florida amendment, and that's the voters get to choose. I don't get to choose in the U.S. Constitution, but in the Florida Constitution, voters get to vote. Every election, I vote on constitutional amendments in Florida. I vote yes or no. It's an example of direct democracy, where I get to vote directly whether I want a constitutional amendment or not. So the Florida Constitution, very different, both in how they're proposed, and that Florida has 5 different ways, and how they're ratified, where the U.S. Constitution has 2 ways, but basically the states get to decide. In the Florida Constitution, the voters get to decide. And so that's a summary of federal, state, local services, and then the similarities and differences, which is a very important topic for our EOC. of the Florida and U.S. Constitution. All right, thank you.